Good morning, guys. I'm talking kind of quietly because everybody in my house is still sleeping except for me, because it's pretty early. You can see my Christmas lights are still on in the background. Do you guys still have your Christmas trees up? Um, Usually I would have mine down by now, but it's just so pretty. I don't know. And it seems so dreary in January when it's so cold. Um, I don't know. So I'll be one of those people and just keep my Christmas lights up until it's embarrassing to do so. um, anyway, happy Tuesday. I hope yesterday went well for you. I hope that you had a good day overall. Shouldn't have been such a shock to you to come back to school, but if you have siblings who came back to the high school for the first time in a really long time, that might have been interesting for them, because I think a lot of them just literally haven't been getting up at a normal hour of the day, but you guys have been in it for the long haul. Me too. So, um, anyway, I hope you also enjoyed learning about Akagem and Jascan yesterday. We will listen a little bit more to them as time goes on, but we're actually going to continue on in the Renaissance today. Just a note, Mr. Hill mentioned that it didn't take you guys very long to get through the material yesterday. I am used to teaching classes like in class and like being able to look at the clock and say, look how much time we have left and this and that. And it's just hard for me to know how long it's going to take you to get things done. So my suggestion to you, I guess, would be please make sure that you have some sort of other assignment or book or something that you could potentially do if you finish a little bit early, just because I don't want Mr. Hill to have to wrangle you around because you're bored. So I will try to fill up your time. I will do my best. Some days I guess I will not. Yesterday I guess was one of those days. Today I will do better. So today we're going to talk a little bit about something that happened during the Renaissance called Humanism, and why it makes a difference in the music of that time period. So you should have a paper today that says in it the Renaissance, instrumental music, and madrigals. And we're just going to start this off together, and there's going to be a couple of activities kind of sprinkled through here. So let's go ahead and get started. In the last segment, we talked about the fact that although church music was still really important in the Renaissance, secular or non-religious music became more and more popular. And we also talked about how part of it was because they were fascinated with Greek and Roman cultures that were like pre-Christianity. And so since they were kind of obsessed with what was going on in those cultures, they just were interested not as much in the church. There was still a lot of influence. I don't want you to think that all of a sudden they just said Christianity is dumb and the church isn't important. That's not true. But it shifted away from that a lot. But another part of it is something called humanism. And this was a system of thought that gave a lot of importance to the achievement and the intellect of human beings rather than giving credit to any institution or religion or supernatural forces. They said doesn't have anything to do with God, doesn't have anything to do with anything but human beings just being their awesome selves. We're going to take the credit for everything good that happens. And the reason that this came about during this time frame, it really was kind of a backlash against what had happened in the Middle Ages. As you recall, a lot of bad things happened during that time, pandemics being one. The Black Plague wiped out most of Europe. During that time, there was widespread poverty, like really bad stuff, and corruption at the highest levels. So most of the people were poor, they were barely scraping by. And the people in the church and the kings and all the people who were in charge of the government were basically just like stealing and taking from these people who were already so poor. And the thought at that time frame was, well, sorry, it's God's will that I steal from you, and it's God's will that your entire family died from the pandemic. God will do what God will do. And people stopped being okay with that. I mean, not that they were really okay with that during the time, but they believed it. In the Renaissance, especially as more discoveries were being made, we talked about how this was the time that Columbus made his voyages. This is the time of like great art and great architecture and scientific discoveries and astronomy and just everything just flourished. And people started to say, you know what? Human beings are actually really great and we're doing amazing stuff. We can pull ourselves up out of the pit and do anything that we set our mind to. And so it makes sense that humanists would be interested in exploring music for their own enjoyment and for their own pleasure. And they're not going to worry so much about the rules that the church has set out and said you have to do music this way and you can't do music this way. They said, no, we're really good at music. We're really good at coming up with cool stuff that we like. So we're going to do what we want to do. And so I'm on the second big paragraph here on the first page. Sorry, I've diverged from it a little bit. In the church music of the Middle Ages, you may remember that the voice was the most important element, and there were very few instances where instruments would be permitted. And if instruments were permitted, they could only follow along and play the exact same notes that the voices were doing. So it was basically like if the voices couldn't quite handle what they were supposed to sing, the instruments would just come along and sort of support them, but they weren't playing anything separately. In the Renaissance period, the instruments were celebrated. All sorts of new instruments were invented. People were kind of playing around with stuff and toying with new things. And they were allowed to play their own interesting melodies and harmonies rather than just being a copycat of the voice. And a new thing is they were allowed to just play by themselves. There didn't have to be any voices involved at all. And this may seem like, not revolutionary to you. During the Renaissance period, that would have been a really, really big deal. Just having instruments play by themselves, not for the purposes of the church, not for the purposes of having voices sing along with them, just for the fun of listening to it and for the fun of playing it. So next, I'm going to describe for you the activity that I want you to do. I don't think I've had you do a web quest yet, but that's going to come up for you on the next page.